MiniWarGaming's The World Engine!
Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and it's time for our first story time in our new narrative campaign, The World Engine. Now, if you've already watched the announcement video, you know that this is going to be a Space Marines versus Necrons campaign with some twists in it as well. But what you might not know, I'm not sure if the announcement said it or not, is that MiniWarGamer Dave and MiniWarGamer Steve are going to be our featured players in this while I just create the story and the missions. So the story starts off in the warp on the planet Hadrian. The planet Hadrian is actually the homeworld for the MiniWarGaming Space Marine Chapter. And I'm not going to go into all the details of why it's in the warp. Suffice it to say, thousands of years ago, the entire planet got drawn into the warp along with the entire chapter. Not that that was their choice, it was something that happened during or just post-Horus Heresy event time. And so they've been traveling through the warp all this time. They've been trying to find a way to escape. And a lot of times they can get out temporarily. They find rifts in the warp, just kind of like how demons get out, they're able to get out as well. But every time they get out, they're only out for a while, and then they get yanked back into their planet. They've basically realized that they are psychically linked to the planet itself. And so they think if they can find a way to get the entire planet out of the warp, maybe they can finally escape. But over the thousands of years that they've been there, they have not yet managed to do so. In fact, when they first got pulled in, they came under assault of huge demon forces and took serious tolls in order to cleanse them off of the world. Most of their chapter, in fact, was destroyed thousands of years ago. So when they do get out of the warp for the temporary times that they're able to, they spend a lot of their time trying to actually bolster their forces and do recruitment, which is really odd because that means their recruitment is all over the galaxy, not just focused on a couple of worlds like a lot of the other chapters. And because they've been in a warp for a very long time, they have developed a resilience to it. And so they actually have the Adamantium Will special rule in their chapter doctrines. And so we have our two main characters in the Space Marine chapter, and that is, first off, Chief Librarian Matthias, and his job is to look for the anomalies to be able to get them out of the warp, even if it's just temporarily, so that they can go out and do more recruiting or try to find some way, unlock some secret to finally free them from this huge curse that they've had for the past thousands of years. And then we have the Master of the Forge, Davicus. Now, the MiniWarGaming Space Marine chapter is descended from the Salamanders chapter, and so they've retained some of the identity with them, and that is that they love their flame weapons and they have the flamecraft in their chapter tactics, but at the same time they've lost a lot of the ability to create the really good weapons that the Salamanders are known to have, all those mastercrafted weapons. But that's mainly because they've been isolated on this world that's not a Forge world, and so they've been basically relegated to scavenging. So Master of the Forge, Davicus, uses every opportunity when they're able to find a way out of the warp to resupply and to find better technology and try to bring it back so that they can always make sure they have enough weaponry, enough ammunition, and whatever else they need in order to battle the constant demon attacks that they fall under, you know, having been a planet floating around in the warp that tends to happen. So, fast forward to the present, at least the present in the 40K universe. They've recently lost their chapter master to a huge demon attack, and they have yet to actually replace him. So currently, they are without a chapter master, which is very unusual, but everything about this chapter is unusual. And so it's kind of led by a bit of a council between the Chief Librarian and the Master of the Forge and several of the captains of the different companies. And they just try to agree on things, and usually they're able to, although it's hard sometimes when they're under such pressure from the warp. But as they're floating through the warp, Chief Librarian Matthias picks up something very unusual, and that is what appears to be a big black hole in the warp. Now, the Eye of Terror is basically the warp made manifest in our world. In other words, it's a location where the warp is actually leaked over and is present in our reality. Well, this black hole appeared to be the opposite. It appeared to be reality in the warp, or in other words, a place where the warp simply didn't exist. And it was a huge area, in fact, much larger than the size of their planet. And so he had a lot of hope as they're drifting through that maybe this could be the key to get out of the warp. So he sends a scout party forward in some of their craft, and he stays in contact with them until they enter the blackness of the black hole, and then they just disappear. And he's not quite sure why they disappear. He's like, well, if it is actually a hole in the warp, then they probably dropped into reality, in which case it'll be hard for him to be able to have communication. So he waits. He waits a few days and doesn't hear anything. So he sends a second scout party, and they go through, and then he waits a few days. And finally, the second scout party does return. and brings him both good and bad news. The good news is that the black hole is exactly what he thinks it is. It's a tear in the warp to reality. So when they actually pass into it, they drop out of the warp into reality. The bad news is it is being caused by a planet, well actually more specifically a moon going around a planet that is infested with Necrons. So something about the Necrons is projecting this big black hole. Now he wasn't surprised that it would be Necrons that would project somewhat of a blackness because they don't have any souls, but to actually project this area where the entire warp simply can't exist is what intrigues Chief Librarian Matthias the most. And so seeing this, and seeing that there's a Necron force there, he confers with all the other captains and with the Master of the Forge, Davicus, and they decide on a course of action, and that is to send a strike force. They can't send their entire chapter because then it leaves their planet vulnerable to the demons, and seeing as how they always get yanked back to that planet, it's kind of important for them to keep it defended. And so he sends a force, and it's actually Davicus that leads this force because Matthias realizes that if there's a device that's projecting this type of blackness or this type of warp killingness around this moon, that he's going to have a hard time being there, being a very powerful psyker. He doesn't want to enter this kind of thing. And so they need to at least disable it before they can really bring in all their psychers and other forces so that they can try to take over whatever happens to be. They're not even sure what it is that's causing it. So this strike force's job is to go in, hit hard, get in there, disable the device, and if they're able to, take it out. That's why the Master of the Forge is going, because of course he would be the best, having been trained to deal with all sorts of technology, even ancient technology, or in this case, Xenos technology. And so our first two missions that you'll be seeing today deal with this initial attack on this Necron tomb world, which is on a moon that's orbiting this huge gas giant. And the first one, Mission 1A, is going to be a very strong strike force, going with drop pods and predators and storm raven gunships and dreadnoughts and terminators and all of that, being led by the Master of the Forge, Davicus himself. The second one, Mission 1B, is going to be more of an infiltration mission, where they're trying to find and sneak past the main Necron forces to see if they can find an alternate entry into the Necron tomb world, which of course is underground. And so we're going to watch those right now. There'll be links in the video description below. Mission 1A, of course, is available for free, and Mission 1B is available in the Vault. And if you're not a Vault member, you can still click on the link for Mission 1B after you've watched the first mission, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial, which will allow you to get instant access to it and everything else that's in the Vault, all the battle reports and painted tutorials and the behind the scenes and everything else. There's tons of stuff in there, and we hope that you'll stick around. In fact, most people who try out the trial do stick around, so that's why we're enticing you in, because we know that once you get a taste, you're not going to be able to give it up. So go ahead, click the links below, watch the battle reports, and happy wargaming.